Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. Corey used bloody history. So, we're going to continue on this theme of New Orleans and the CIA. And we have just gone over a few documents regarding Thomas Beckham. And it's obvious that his handler was Fredley Crisman. And it's pretty obvious that Crisman was somewhat higher up the chain than Clay Shaw. As Clay Shaw, when Clay Shaw was notified that he was being charged in the assassination of President Kennedy, the first phone call he makes is to Fredley Crisman. Same thing for Thomas Beckham. When Thomas Beckham gets subpoenaed to testify at the grand jury for Jim Garrison, first call he makes is to Fredley Crisman. So Fredley Crisman is an important fucking guy. Important fucking guy. Goes back to the early days of the CIA, Project Bluebeam, and all that stuff. So, or Blue Book. Oh, Blue Beam is the fucking one with the the holograms, right? But Blue Book was the UFO stuff that Crisman was involved with. So we'll start off with a couple letters and some press releases and some newspaper articles before we get into Mr. Crisman's testimony at the grand jury for Clay Shaw. So, press release, October 31st, 1968, from the District Attorney, Parish of Orleans. A grand jury subpoena was issued today in connection with the investigation into the assassination of President Kennedy for the appearance of an out-of-state witness, Mr. Fredley Crisman, from Tacoma, Washington. Mr. Crisman has been engaged in undercover activity for a part of the industrial warfare complex for years. His cover is that of a preacher and a person, quote, engaged in work to help gypsies. Our information indicates that since the early 1960s, he has made many trips to the New Orleans and Dallas area in connection with his undercover work for that part of the warfare industry engaged in the manufacture of what is termed in military language a hardware, meaning those weapons sold to the U.S. government which are uniquely large and expensive. Mr. Crisman is a, quote, former employee of Boeing Aircraft Company, in the sense that one defendant in that case is a former employee of Lockheed Aircraft Company in Los Angeles. In intelligence terminology, this ordinarily means that the connection still exists, but that the former employee has moved into an underground operation. More often than not, a bad record or evidence indicating that he has been, quote, fired is prepared for the parent company to increase the disassociation between the two. Mr. Crisman is being called as a witness because our office has developed evidence indicating a relationship on his part to persons involved in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. For the information of the public, we want to reiterate that President Kennedy was murdered by elements of the industrial warfare complex, working in concert with individuals in the United States government. At the time of his murder, President Kennedy was working to end the Cold War. By that time, however, the Cold War had become America's biggest business. The annual income of the defense industry was well over $20 billion a year, and there were forces in that industry and in the U.S. government which opposed the ending of the Cold War. The rest of this release is pretty irrelevant. It's more of an advertisement for some college course, so we're going to skip that. But that's a pretty interesting take from Garrison's office that Crisman was actually part of this. He was an undercover agent engaged in this industrial warfare complex. So I would think of, corporate espionage and stuff like that is what Garrison's kind of getting at. And that would explain why Crisman had all these covers as a preacher and starting all these different organizations. And, Beckham talked about how Crisman had gone into business with Colonel Lowry, right? And they had a fucking bookstore that never sold any books, right? And so these were fronts while Crisman was out doing other things. And when you piece together his life, it's obvious he's been working in intelligence his whole life, right? And that really gets to the heart of what the CIA does, right? The CIA ultimately is involved in large-scale corporate espionage on some levels, right? And this is probably what Fred Lee Crisman was doing. And hopefully one day we'll get to the bottom of his role in this assassination, if there was one, or if he was just a cleanup guy meant to help people out once the shit hit the fan, right? Because if I'm not mistaken, Crisman doesn't really pop up prior to the assassination in New Orleans. It's only after the assassination that he gets involved with Beckham and Clay Shaw. So what I get is that Crisman in 63, he's like born in 1902 or something like that. So he's like 60 years old, maybe even a little older. He has got to be like an OG intelligence guy, right? These OG intelligence guys. So I'll tell a little story. So my aunt, who was my father's half-sister, she married a guy in the 80s named Paul Gale. So he was my uncle by marriage, okay? He died when I was 6. But Paul Gale was a founding member of the OSS and the CIA. And he was so goddamn important that there's virtually nothing written about him. You're not going to find anything. Go Google him, you'll find very little. Some memorial stuff, and that's about it. But I can tell you he was the head of the CIA station in Iran at the time of the Shah. So he was an important guy. He was personal friends with Donovan. Okay, so, and this was my uncle by marriage, who, like I said, died when I was 6. So no, I'm not CIA. Okay, I don't have this connection to him at all. But my father was fortunate enough to be able to have many conversations with him. And my father told me that even in his 80s, I mean, the guy died when he was like 86 or something like that. Really, really old guy when I remember him. My father told me that the CIA would still send people to him in his, like even in the months before he died. Like the CIA would send people to him and send new recruits to him for him to feel out or do something with. So the idea that these guys ever leave the CIA is ridiculous, right? And that's kind of the vibe I get from Mr. Fred Lee Crisman. He's one of these just guys who's so OG in the CIA that he knows exactly how everything works, what to do, who to call, how to fix things. He seems like Fred Lee Crisman's a cleanup man to some degree in as far as his role in the assassination. Like I said, I do not know of his role before the assassination, if there was one. That information will get through additional information on Thomas Beckham. I got to get back to that Beckham book. Thomas Beckham had a book written about him. I've got it. I skimmed through it while preparing my book, but I really need to do a deeper dive into it because I think that we're going to get to the heart of this New Orleans intelligence complex through Thomas Beckham and this relationship with Crisman. And I have a feeling David Christ is a part of all this stuff too, and we'll get to him eventually. But yeah, this is a pretty fascinating press release from Garrison's office. Let's continue on. Okay, so Crisman, being that he was involved in the fucking CIA going back to 47, he was involved in some of this weird UFO shit they were doing in 47, which tells me that the UFO shit is all CIA nonsense. But he was involved in something called the Maury Island incident. And so, if you look on Wikipedia, that's the only thing they talk about when it comes to Fred Lee Crisman. So, but let me read this. The World of Flying Saucers, the Maury Island Fragments. The Maury Island Mystery, a complex and eventually tragic affair, occurred near Tacoma, Washington, less than 100 miles from the place where Arnold had sighted the 9 discs. I don't know who they're referring to here. In this mystery, too, Palmer was involved. According to their story, 2 harbor patrolmen named Harold Dahl and Fred L. Crisman on June 31st had observed a group of 6 flying discs that hovered over their boat near Maury Island and jammed their radio when they tried to notify authorities. One of the discs had seemed to be disabled and showered down a lava-like metallic fragments that damaged the boat and killed the dog on board. The discs had then disappeared, but the fragments remained as proof of the visit. The men also claimed to have taken some pictures that showed the 6 objects, but were fogged as though by radiation. Back on shore, they had not telephoned the newspapers, nor had they notified any government officials. Instead, they had mailed a box of the fragments to Ray Palmer to prove that they had actually seen an accident to the flying saucer. Crisman was no stranger to amazing stories. A science fiction fan, he apparently had accepted the Shaver stories as literal truth. More than a year before the Maury Island episode, he had written to Palmer, warning him that the knowledge contained in the Shaver stories was too dangerous to print. Identifying himself as an ex-Air Force pilot who had flown the hump, Crisman explained that when he was in Burma, he had been exploring a cave when a Diro attacked him with a mysterious ray that made a hole the size of a dime in his arm. Palmer had kept up the correspondence and then some months later received a telephone call from Crisman, then in Texas. For $250, said Crisman, he would descend into a cave and take some actual pictures of the mysterious underground machines that Shaver had described. The result of this offer is not known, but in July of 1947, Palmer received another letter from Crisman. He had witnessed an accident to a flying saucer and was sending a box of the fragments as proof. Palmer considered buying the story for fate, but first he asked Arnold, living close to the scene, to investigate the tale. Arnold agreed, thus the first man to report flying saucers became also a victim of the first flying saucer hoax. With an advance of $200, Arnold flew to Tacoma and into a nightmare of mystery. The two men were elusive. Their story full of discrepancies, their manner evasive. Wondering at first whether the affair was a hoax, Arnold finally attributed the strange behavior of the men to their fear of hostile saucers. Alarmed, he called in the help of Army intelligence. Two officers arrived from Hamilton Air Force Base, California, and made a careful investigation. They found that Dahl and Crisman were not harbor patrolmen, but salvagers of floating lumber. Their boat was scarcely seaworthy and showed no evidence of major repairs. They couldn't remember what they had done with the pictures they mentioned, and although the saucer accident was supposed to have occurred nearly 6 weeks earlier, they had never notified the authorities or even mentioned it to a reporter. The only evidence offered for the truth of their tale was a collection of strange fragments, which were later found to be slag from a local smelter plant. Similar fragments could be found by the ton on Maury Island. The officers concluded that they had wasted their time on a flagrant hoax, but the bewildered Arnold insisted that they take some of the fragments for analysis. Unhappily, on the way back to the base, the plane crashed, and although 2 passengers parachuted to safety, both officers were killed. At once, fantastic rumors sprang up that the Tacoma discs had been spaceships, and that the beings who had operated the craft had been forced to arrange the plane crash so no one could analyze the fragments of their disabled spacecraft. Arnold himself seemed to believe that the crash had resulted from extraplanetary sabotage, but investigation showed a more ordinary cause. A burnt exhaust stack had set the left wing afire. The blazing wing had then broken from the fuselage and torn off the plane's tail. For a time, government officials considered placing a charge of fraud against the 2 men who had started the unhappy chain of events. After further questioning, both had admitted that their sighting had been a hoax, planned merely to make their story more sellable. But when first Arnold and then military intelligence entered the picture, the hoax had simply gotten out of hand. Since the men obviously had never intended the tragic outcome and were not directly responsible for it, the idea of prosecution was abandoned. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Maury Island incident. If you want to go and fucking look this up, this is a goddamn joke, if you ask me. When the fuck was? I don't even know what year it was. Didn't say what year it was, but this was in the 40s. Okay, so Fred Lee Crisman, going back to the 1940s, who's clearly a fucking spook, was involved in trying to perpetuate alien hoaxes. Alien hoaxes perpetuated by Fred Lee Crisman, who was the man that Clay Shaw called immediately after he was fucking arrested by Jim Garrison. You can't make this stuff up, ladies and gentlemen. You simply fucking can't. All right, so we've got a series of photocopied articles, and I'm going to try to go through these and not waste a lot of your time. because I think there's some duplication here. But this series of articles is from like November 2nd, November 7th, November 8th, November 9th, 68. October 31st. And so, yeah, November 68. We got a whole bunch of articles from October and November of 68. I'm assuming, this one's from Tacoma News Tribune. The other ones don't say New Orleans. But let's go and if we have some duplication here, I apologize. Tacoma News Tribune, November 1968, by Jack Wilkins. No subpoena from New Orleans has yet been served upon Tacoma and Fred Lee Crisman, he told the News Tribune Saturday. But he said that that when it is served, he will be willing to go, provided expenses are paid for himself and his attorney, Robert G. Griffin. Tony and Ergo, let's get some information on Robert G. Griffin, Crisman's lawyer. Crisman also said he believes there was a conspiracy behind the assassination of John F. Kennedy, but that he does not know who conspired and that he had nothing whatsoever to do with it. The subpoena issued by New Orleans grand jury is in connection with investigation of the assassination. He said Saturday that in his opinion, New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison, who was in charge of an investigation of the assassination, believes that money raised by anti-Castro groups was diverted to finance the assassination. Met him later. Crisman said that he had been associated with Thomas Edward Beckham, who was a disc jockey in New Orleans under the name Mark Evans. Crisman said Beckham was a, quote, banker for the, quote, Cuban freedom fighters, and that Garrison probably has arrived at the erroneous conclusion that Crisman knows something of importance about Beckham. Quote, but I met him after all this had taken place, Crisman told the News Tribune. I met him here in the Northwest. Crisman said he does believe there was a conspiracy behind the assassination. Lee Harvey Oswald obviously had a part in the conspiracy, he said, but there must have been much more to it. Anyone with military training knows that from a bolt-action rifle, that many shots could not have been fired into that small a target, which was moving along a curve in a 15-mile-an-hour wind, with the shots coming from 6 stories high at least. It couldn't have been done with the only amount of practice that Oswald was supposed to have had. Beckham was subpoenaed by Garrison last December, along with Eugene Hall of Kernville, California. That's Lauren Hall of Kernville, California. I don't know why they put Eugene Hall. It's Lauren Hall. Theorizing about Garrison's reason for issuing the subpoena, Crisman said, before the Bay of Pigs disaster and the missile crisis, the Cuban refugees in Florida and Louisiana were regarded as heroes. Lots of big private money came in to support the training and equipping of forces in Central America for an anti-Castro invasion. Beckham, or Evans, was a very successful New Orleans disc jockey at the time. He was brought into some of the funding parties for the freedom fighters. Look for money. Quote, then came the Bay of Pigs. No one was interested in another invasion, and everyone started looking for the money that had been raised. The CIA had charged the refugees for the training given them, but this did not account for all of the money. That's a good observation. The FBI and Treasury agents began looking for Beckham, who had been banker for the freedom fighters. He stopped at Dallas and then in Jacksonville. At Jacksonville, he turned over $30,000 to the FBI, but I understand that Garrison feels he dropped off 10 times that amount in Dallas, and that the money was used to finance the assassination. Crisman said that subsequently he met Beckham in the Pacific Northwest and traveled to New Orleans and other eastern cities with him to help promote records. Okay, so let's pause right here and just take the information that that Garrison is alleging against Beckham, which we didn't hear anywhere else, did we? We didn't hear this anywhere else alleged, that Garrison thought Beckham was moving money for the assassination. Now, why do we have any kind of precedent or corroboration for the idea that Beckham would be delivering money? Well, sure as fuck we do, because Fred Lee Crisman, he said that he and Fred Lee Crisman were delivering money to the various political parties, right? They were political operatives delivering cash money to various political groups, right? So yes, these people are couriers. Beckham was a courier. So the idea that he would be delivering money to people in Dallas is completely in line with what we know of his activities after the assassination, right? So yes, I mean, why else would these guys have this kind of schmuck who's not some fucking super spy on the payroll, who's running all kinds of fake churches, using 100 different aliases, creating fake diplomas, right? This kind of scumbag is exactly who the CIA needs to do things like deliver money and information, like he delivered to Lawrence Howard at the Executive Inn in Dallas, right? When he delivered the money and the sketches and all that stuff, and Lawrence Howard freaks out. He's like, this can't be it, right? So, of course, this is totally in line with what we would know of Beckham's activities. Super spy. Perhaps Garrison feels that some of the money is buried in the Northwest, and that if he gets a lead to it, he will get a lead to the assassination, Crisman commented. He also said that Garrison pictures him as, quote, highly paid undercover man, a kind of super spy engaged in industrial espionage. He asserted that he is not engaged in any such activity. November 7th, 68, looks like pages 8 through 12, by Ed Jeffords. Fred Lee Crisman, 49, of 928 North Grant Avenue, Wednesday night was served with a subpoena ordering him to appear before the New Orleans Parish Grand Jury November 21st and 22nd to testify in connection with an investigation into the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison, who directs the investigation, said Monday that he was calling Crisman in as a witness because his office has developed information regarding a relationship between Crisman and the district attorney's investigation into the Kennedy assassination. Louis W. Ivan, chief investigator for the district attorney, said Crisman has been asked to testify in New Orleans under a subpoena, which would prevent his being arrested there in connection with the case. Pair indicted, 2 persons, Clay L. Shaw of New Orleans and Edgar Eugene Bradley of Los Angeles. And we'll get to Edgar Eugene Bradley here shortly in the next week or two. We'll get to him because he's part of this. He's part of this New Orleans crew that will tie the New Orleans crew to Los Angeles. And who do we have in Los Angeles? We got the mobsters out there, right? So, but Bradley is obviously connected to intelligence. Somehow he's connected with all these right-wing groups. He's kind of like a Jules Rico Kimball kind of guy. Maybe a little more sophisticated. He's tied in with these church fronts that were very, very sophisticated when you start getting into some of these other characters, like Colonel Gale. Coincidence to my uncle by marriage, but there's another Colonel Gale involved in these churches out there in California at this time, and who's definitely connected to some of these behind-the-scenes people like Robert Welch of the, it wasn't the Minutemen. It was whatever one of these other right wing groups. But so here we go. Pair indicted. 2 persons, Clay L. Shaw of New Orleans and Edgar Eugene Bradley of Los Angeles, have been indicted by the grand jury for conspiracy in the murder. Crisman, who repeatedly said he will never answer the subpoena, accepted the legal document in apparent good spirits. He questioned, however, an accompanying check for slightly more than $500. The Tacoma man said he would contact Garrison's office in an effort to obtain a larger sum so his attorney, Robert Griffin, can accompany him to Louisiana. Crisman, who also uses the names Fred Lee and Dr. John Gold, Dr. John Gold, that's funny, was a business partner of Thomas Edward Beckham, who already has testified before the grand jury. Ivan would neither confirm nor deny speculation that Crisman was called to testify as a result of Beckham's testimony. Crisman stated in an interview that Beckham was involved with anti-Castro Cubans in New Orleans in 1963 before coming to this area where he was associated with Crisman. Anti-Castroites testifying in the probe at about the same time as Beckham were Lawrence Howard and Loren Eugene Hall, both described as anti-Castroites, now residing in Southern California. Hang on one second. Let me reread this sentence because I'm perplexed. Testifying in the probe at about the same time as Beckham were Lawrence Howard and Loren Eugene Hall, both described as anti-Castroites, now residing in Southern California. Okay, I don't have any information that they ever fucking testified. Lawrence Howard never testified shit. Loren Hall did before the HSCA. And he ran his mouth to a bunch of fucking reporters and people in the 70s. But I am completely unaware of any testimony that's gone on with these fucking guys. But that's a whole nother story we'll get to. An Oregon man, G. Clinton Wheat of Calumet Falls, was subpoenaed in July, but has refused to testify and is reported to be in hiding. All right, guys, I need you to pull the data on G. Clinton Wheat, because I never heard of this fucking name ever until this moment. G. Clinton Wheat of Calumet Falls. Edgar Bradley, the second person indicted by the New Orleans Parish Grand Jury in this case, will appear Friday in Sacramento for extradition proceedings. Clay Shaw, a retired businessman accused by Garrison of being active in the planning of Kennedy's murder, has appealed his case to the U.S. Supreme Court on the grounds that Garrison violated his civil rights. The court has given no indication whether it will hear the case. Garrison, on many occasions, has stated President Kennedy's death was the result of a conspiracy involving anti-Castro Cubans, right-wing militants, and persons who previously had cooperated with the Central Intelligence Agency. The Warren Report, on the basis of what it said was available evidence, concluded the assassination was the work of Lee Harvey Oswald acting alone. Crisman's name does not appear in the report. November 8th, 68. Fred Crisman, 49, of 928 North Grant, who has been subpoenaed by New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison to testify in connection with an investigation into assassination of President Kennedy, appeared in court here Thursday. Crisman, arraigned before Judge DeWitt Rowland's municipal court, entered pleas of innocence to charges of reckless driving, having no valid driver's license, and carrying a concealed weapon, according to City Prosecutor Jeffrey Cross. He was arrested the morning of October 31st by Tacoma police near South 15th and Cedar Streets on the charges. He was released on bail the same morning. The date of his jury trial, originally slated for Friday, was set over on January 10th by Judge Rowland at the request of Crisman's attorney, Robert Griffin, who explained that he is busy preparing defenses in cases soon to come up in higher court. Cross pointed out that Crisman will be leaving soon to answer his subpoena in New Orleans. That's interesting. A little tidbit of information. November 9th, 68. A new city ordinance which prohibits the publication of certain material will be discussed by a panel of newsmen at 9:20 p.m. Saturday at Courthouse C, Coffee House 919, Courthouse C. The panel will include Gene Lewis, Radio KTNT News Director Wynn Anderson, and Ed Jeffers, newspaper reporters, and Fred L. Crisman, who conducts a talk show on Radio KAYE under the name Dr. John Gold. That's wild. This Dr. John Gold thing is weirding me out. November 20th, page 19. Attorney Robert G. Griffin said Wednesday he would accompany his client Fred Lee Crisman to New Orleans, where Crisman will testify Thursday morning before the grand jury there. Griffin said he and Crisman would arrive there Wednesday night and be ready to testify at 9:30 the next morning. After being subpoenaed by District Attorney Jim Garrison to testify in the New Orleans investigation of President John F. Kennedy, Crisman said he would go only if funds were provided so his attorney could accompany him. Okay, this is a stall tactic that he's trying to use, right? I'll come, but only if you give me double the money. He indicated he would ask Garrison's office for more than the $550 which was given to him with the New Orleans subpoena. Okay, so remember, this is 1968. Okay, $550 is more like $3,000 of today's money. Wednesday, that he is to be reimbursed for his expenses when the pair reaches Louisiana. Strong ties. Crisman, who conducts a radio show as Dr. John Gold, okay, he's not a doctor and his name is definitely not John Gold, apparently was subpoenaed on the testimony of Thomas Edward Beckham, a singer and radio announcer who testified in February. Beckham allegedly had strong ties with militants, anti-Castro Cubans, who Garrison has said were involved in a conspiracy to murder the president. Crisman and Beckham, who also was known as Mark Evans, were once business partners in Olympia. The Tacoman admitted association with Beckham and said he's been in New Orleans several times. He denied, however, any knowledge of an assassination plot and said he doesn't know why Garrison issued the subpoena for him. Two persons already have been charged with conspiracy in the case by New Orleans Parish Grand Jury. Shaw charge. Clay L. Shaw, the first to be charged, has appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court to halt the prosecution on the grounds that Garrison violated his civil rights. He's appealing a decision of the Louisiana Supreme Court, which found that the New Orleans District Attorney was within his rights in acting as he did. The second man charged with conspiracy in the murder, Edgar Eugene Bradley of Los Angeles, apparently never will stand trial due to action last week by California Governor Ronald Reagan. Interesting. Governor Reagan will not allow Bradley to be extradited from California to face Louisiana indictment. Bradley is employed by Dr. Carl McIntyre, who conducts conservative radio programs across the nation. District Attorney Garrison has contended that President Kennedy's assassination was the result of a New Orleans-based conspiracy. The Warren Commission, empowered by President Johnson to investigate the murder, ruled that it was the work of Lee Harvey Oswald acting alone. Garrison probe calls Tacoma to testify. October 31st, 68, page 2. Dr. John Gold, free on bail. Fred Lee Crisman, 49, of 928 North Grant, a radio commentator and a, what the fuck word is that? Puyallup. On a pile-up station under the name Dr. John Gold. Interesting. Was released on bail Thursday morning following his arrest near South 15th and Cedar at 1:50 a.m., police reported. Police said Crisman was booked on charges of reckless driving, having no valid driver license, and carrying a concealed weapon. A loaded .38 caliber pistol was found in his car, police said. An arraignment was set for November 8th. October 31st, 68. New Orleans. A grand jury subpoena was issued Thursday for Fred Lee Crisman of Tacoma, Washington, in connection with the investigation of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, the district attorney's office said. District Attorney Jim Garrison, who directs the controversial investigation, said in an announcement that Crisman has been engaged in undercover activity for a part of the industrial warfare complex for years. Crisman was subpoenaed to appear before the Orleans Parish Grand Jury November 21st. Garrison said his information indicates Crisman has made numerous trips to the New Orleans and Dallas areas in connection with undercover work for the warfare industry since the early 1960s. He said Crisman is a former employee of Boeing Company and theorized that Crisman has moved into an underground operation. Garrison said his office has developed information regarding a relationship between Crisman and persons involved in the assassination of President John Kennedy. We want to reiterate, Garrison's statement said, that President Kennedy was murdered by elements of the industrial warfare complex, working in concert with individuals in the United States government. At the time of his murder, President Kennedy was working to end the Cold War, Garrison said. By that time, however, the Cold War had become America's biggest business. Garrison maintains that the assassination was the result of a conspiracy plotted in New Orleans. The Warren Commission ruled evidence indicated the president's slaying was the work of one man, Lee Harvey Oswald. November 1st, 68, by Ed Jeffords. A Tacoma man, Fred Lee Crisman. I want you to note, Ed Jeffords was just mentioned in a previous article as having done an appearance with Fred Lee Crisman, right? So these guys are friends and know each other. So this article is somewhat cover, I would assume. A Tacoma man, Fred Lee Crisman, 49, of 928 North Grant Avenue, was subpoenaed by New Orleans grand jury Thursday in connection with the investigation into the assassination of President John Kennedy. Crisman, who conducts a talk program on Pile-Up radio program KAYE under the pseudonym Dr. John Gold, is a former high school teacher. He also claims to be a bishop in the Universal Life Church. District Attorney Jim Garrison, who directs the New Orleans investigation, said Crisman was directed to appear before the Orleans Parish Grand Jury November 21st. He was arrested earlier Thursday by Tacoma police officers on charges of reckless driving, having no valid driver's license, and carrying a concealed weapon, and is to appear here for arraignment on those charges November 8th. Known association. The subpoenaed Tacoman is known to have been associated with at least one person already involved in the far-reaching investigation. In late 1966, Crisman and Thomas Edward Beckham incorporated 7 businesses in Olympia, according to police department there. Among those companies were the Northwest Relief Society, Associated Discount Services, Tab Productions, Inc., Professional Research Bureau, and the National Institute of Criminology. Olympia police investigators said no business was conducted from an office rented by the pair. Some printed material was confiscated when the firms apparently went out of business, said officers. Beckham, who entertained under the name Mark Evans, was subpoenaed by Garrison last December, along with Lauren Eugene Hall of Kernville, California. Gypsy Aid Program. Before beginning his present job as radio commentator, Crisman was involved in a program to obtain a grant from the Office of Economic Opportunity from the Education of gypsy children. He also taught for 3 years at White River High School in Buckley, resigning in June 1960. Crisman says he's the local spiritual leader of an organization known as the Universal Life Church. In a booklet prepared by Crisman, he claims the title of church bishop. He also is listed as one of 5 local incorporators. In a biography included in the pamphlet, the subpoena subject says he holds degrees from Washington State University, Branchridge College in England, and the Athenaeum Ecumenical Divinity Institute, a.k.a. he's a spook. Willamette degree. Louis Bruno, State Superintendent of Public Instruction, confirmed that Crisman was granted a bachelor's degree from Willamette University in Oregon and completed 1 course at Pacific Lutheran in 1958. According to a statement from the British Consulate General in Seattle, there is no such accredited school in England as Bantridge College. You don't say. At one time, Crisman is known to have rented a vacant theater in Tacoma as headquarters of the ULC. There is no record of any services of the church ever being held there, however. Other incorporation papers also once listed Crisman as president of a car lot owned at the time by former Tacoman Julio Grassi, an unsuccessful candidate for mayor. There's that Julio Grassi name coming up again, or Julio Grassi, that was mentioned by Beckham, right? So that guy pops up. He's connected here somehow. Election campaign. Recently, the announcer was involved in a primary election campaign for Robert L. Lavender, Bob Lavender. Lavender unsuccessfully sought a state legislative seat as a Democrat in Seattle's 37th district and was chairman of the group formed to draft Albert D. Rossellini to run for governor in 1968. Garrison's Tacoma subpoena is the latest of several issued on the West Coast. Earlier this year, an arrest warrant charged Edgar Eugene Bradley of Los Angeles with conspiracy to commit murder. Bradley is the West Coast representative of Dr. Carl McIntyre, a conservative radio commentator, and successfully has fought extradition. Subpoenas also have been issued in recent weeks for Lawrence Howard of Los Angeles and G. Clinton Wheat, there's that fucking name again, of Klamath Falls, Oregon. Howard answered the New Orleans subpoena, but Wheat refused to acknowledge it, and now is reported to be hiding in Northern California. The first person charged in Garrison's controversial probe, Clay L. Shaw of New Orleans, recently appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court to halt prosecution. District Attorney Garrison maintains assassination was the result of a conspiracy plotted in New Orleans. The Warren Commission said available evidence indicated the slaying was the work of one man, Lee Harvey Oswald. All right, here's another one by Ed Jeffords. A pamphlet issued by Fred Lee Crisman on the eve of the subpoena by a New Orleans grand jury labels local sensitivity training classes sinister and calls for the infiltration and disruption of PTA organizations. The document, written and advertised by Crisman under his radio name John Gold, indicates he believes the sensitivity training is a communist-oriented program. Well, fuck, he got that one right, didn't he? It's hilarious. His booklet, which is available for 50 cents from a Tacoma post office box number registered to the Universal Life Church, details a plan to disrupt elections of PTA and other community and civic organizations. Well, hey, even a fucking broken clock is right twice a day, right? So that was a good one on his part. Bore from within. Quote, you must take a page from the Communist Manifesto. You must bore from within. You must learn to halt the elections at PTA units, the booklet proclaims. Do not stop with school organizations, the document states. Infiltrate each garden club, suborn its social policy, and convert it to an agitprop group. Calling for the establishment of a Central Reaction Headquarters, Crisman writes, you must be ready to disrupt and delay any elections that allow officers to be installed that are none of us, that are not one of us. Crisman, in the mimeographed 9-page leaflet called Local Sensitivity Training Classes, organized brainwashing and urged readers to establish small training cells for the purpose of agitation and propaganda. Crazy how the CIA was trying to break this stuff up in the 1960s, but today it's the CIA pushing this communist bullshit. Almost sounds like the organization was infiltrated by Zionists. Crazy, huh? All right, war for youth minds. Eventually, stated Crisman, we will win this war for the minds of the youth of America. Is this prescient article or what? Entitled What to Do Until Sanity Returns, the booklet was labeled issue number 1. Crisman, who advertised the document on his nightly radio talk show, was subpoenaed Thursday by New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison in connection with an investigation into the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Next one by Rod Cardwell. Mayor A.L. Rasmussen confirmed Friday that he summoned the police chief and deputy chief to his office late Thursday afternoon to hear Freddie Crisman explain his side of arrest charges against him. Crisman, a commentator for Pulley Up radio station KAYE, was arrested here early Thursday and booked on charges of reckless driving, having no valid driver's license, and carrying a concealed weapon. He was later released on $710 bail bond. It's pretty wild that a guy who's got 1,000 fucking degrees and memberships in organizations and certificates couldn't fake a driver's license. Both Rasmussen and Chief Charles Ziti told the News Tribune that there was no attempt by the mayor to have the charges against Crisman quashed. No subpoena discussion. Zittel also said that there was no discussion in the meeting of news service reports from New Orleans that Crisman of Tacoma had been subpoenaed to testify before the Orleans Parish grand jury in connection with the investigation into the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. We didn't discuss that because it's not a Tacoma police matter. Others at the meeting were Deputy Chief R.C. Dupenthaler and Jim Nicholas, manager of KAYE. Rasmussen said he merely wanted the police officials to hear Crisman explain the combination of circumstances involved in his arrest. Obtained gun permit. Zittel said Crisman showed him a gun permit, which he obtained Thursday following his arrest from Sheriff Jack Berry. The police arrest report on Crisman stated that a loaded .38 caliber pistol was found in his automobile. Crisman, who has a night talk show on KAYE under the name Dr. John Gold, is to appear for arraignment in municipal court November 8th. The bail bond was posted by John Carbone, a bondsman. Rasmussen said Crisman believes it essential that he carry a weapon because of the commentator's contention that he was shot at recently while driving on River Road. Oregon driver's license. The mayor said Crisman has an Oregon driver's license because his voting residence is in that state. Rasmussen quoted Crisman as saying that an unlighted auto pursued him early Thursday and that he attempted to elude it. According to the mayor, the auto caught up with Crisman and flashed a red light. Crisman was relieved to find it was a police car. Radio station KAYE has carried live broadcasts of city council meetings since Rasmussen took office last November. So these articles have some fascinating little tidbits, right? Nothing crucial, nothing overwhelming, but little dots of information on Crisman's activities, which go to show that this guy does all kinds of weird random shit, right? All CIA cover stuff. All of it. All right. So, next. Looks like a letter to Jim Garrison, perhaps highlighted to Mr. G. So it says, Mr. G, out on the coast is a man you should talk to. Trace this information out. His name is Freddie Crisman of Tacoma, Washington. He flies to New Orleans steadily. In 1964, 11 times. In 1965, 17 times. In 1966, 32 times. In 1967, 24 times. He is the first man that Clay Shaw called after being told he was in trouble. And he is the first man that Beckham called also. He was questioned by both CIA and FBI in 1966, but he is able to call Washington, and they laid off of him in a hurry. He's very good friends with the Cubans, and especially SA in Dallas, special agents in Dallas. He goes there too, and JR in New Orleans. JR, it says a handwritten note here, Jorge Rodriguez and Ernesto Rodriguez. Mr. Crisman is a very odd man. He supplied the money for certain political campaigns. In return, is very much protected by both Louisiana politicians and Washington state people. He has diplomatic passport issued on the word of a Senate chairman of a committee. He seems to have no income and certainly spends a large sum of money on air travel. He is friends with, looks like F. Gramillion of your state. Let's look into that. F. Gramillion. His private office has an unlisted number, 206 MA 7-4790, and it is the meeting place for many odd characters from Cubans to political figures. Ask him to take a lie detector test and then ask him where he put the $200,000 delivered to him by Beckham in August of 67, in parentheses, Cuban money. Money that is used to recruit killers to be sent to Cuba to try for Castro. Ask him if it is not true that he has sent 5 different men to special agents in Dallas for final briefing. Make Crisman talk, and you will have the answer to why there has been fighting among certain Cuban factions over the money in certain buried places. You know this is true because some special Cubans have dropped out of sight. Dropped in Torpedo Junction, in parentheses. Crisman is also a pilot. He is the man that, through Beckham and special agents, paid off certain people. Is not odd that he is a friend of Clay's as well as Beckham. Is it not strange that he knew Tippett? Ooh, that's interesting. Fred Lee Crisman knew J.D. Tippett. Interesting. Just ask Crisman certain question under a lie detector and see what the answers are. He is the one that advised Mark Evans to hide out in Iowa, not to go to New Orleans to make any statement about money or anything. Have an investigator check up on the long-distance calls that Beckham Evans has made to Crisman in the past year, and the wild placements Crisman has called. He's leaving for... Oh, I can't read that. It looks like... Yeah, I can't read that. Something A. In January. Keep digging and you'll have some old-fashioned something on the run. All right, and down at the bottom, the notes say State of Washington. Then it says IMP, period, photo of F.L. Crisman. And then next to that it says D. White, parentheses, Army. Then it says is lifted at something man equals looks like F. Lewis. I can't read that. But that's some interesting stuff there, right? It would be fascinating to find a connection between Fred Lee Crisman and J.D. Tippett. That would blow me away. All right, moving on. All right, so we have another article here. JFK plot probe subpoena issued. Quote, I am no use to him, says Tacoma man. This is by Clarence Doucet. A Tacoma man, Washington, subpoenaed Thursday in relation with District Attorney Jim Garrison's investigation of the Kennedy assassination, told the Times-Picayune his only connection is that I know a guy who knows some Cubans. In a telephone interview, Fred Lee Crisman was asked if he will fight the Orleans Parish grand jury subpoena. Ordering his appearance as a witness, he replied, I have no reason to go to New Orleans. The subpoena calls for his appearance before the grand jury at 10 a.m. Thursday, November 21st. A statement by Garrison's office said Crisman has been engaged in undercover activity for a part of the industrial warfare complex for years. His cover is that of a preacher and a person engaged in work to help gypsies. Not a preacher. Crisman said that he is not a preacher, but that he did outline a federal program which was accepted by the Office of Economic Opportunity to help gypsies. He said he submitted the program earlier this year and is now in effect at Head Start schools in Tacoma and Baltimore, Maryland. The statement from Garrison's office also said our information matches that since the early 1960s, he has made many trips to the New Orleans and Dallas areas in connection with his undercover work, that for part of the warfare industry engaged in the manufacture of what is termed in military language a hardware, meaning those weapons sold to U.S. government which are uniquely large and expensive. Crisman was identified as a former employee of Boeing aircraft. Crisman said he once did work for Boeing. And he also told the Times-Picayune, yes, I've been to New Orleans quite a few times. He also said he'd been to Dallas, Texas on occasion, but insisted he's of no use to him, referring to Garrison. He knows Beckham. He said he thinks the only reason he could would expect, or why he could explain the subpoena is that it was a friend of his, Thomas Edward Beckham, the singing minister from Omaha, Nebraska, who was already testified before the grand jury in connection with the JFK death probe. In fact, he said, Tommy Beckham called me today, and he also called me last night. He did not discuss The phone calls further, but he identified Beckham as the person to whom he referred when he said, "I know a guy who knows some Cubans." When Beckham was called as a witness, the subpoena alleged he was in Dallas in November '63, the month that President Kennedy was assassinated there. I always thought Garrison had something, said Crisman, but this the subpoena is a little humorous. He said he's known Beckham for about 2.5 years, and explaining it reference to Crisman as a former Boeing employee, as asserted. The intelligence terminology, this ordinarily means that the connection still exists, but that the, quote, former employee has moved into an underground operation. More often than not, a, quote, bad record or evidence indicating that he's been fired is prepared for parent company to increase the disassociation between the two of them. Evidence alleged Mr. Crisman's being called a witness because our office has developed evidence indicating a relationship to his persons involved with people involved with the Kennedy assassination. Garrison maintained the assassination was a result of a conspiracy. The Warren Commission said it was Lee Harvey Oswald. All right, the rest of this is kind of irrelevant. The last paragraph says the annual income of the defense industry is well over $20 billion a year, and there were forces in that industry and in the U.S. government which opposed the ending of the Cold War. So Garrison believes that Fred Lee Crisman was involved in this kind of propagation of the Cold War on behalf of the CIA, and that involved in that were his duties in, paying off various entities, being a money guy, a funneler, a courier, all this various stuff. So no heavy lifting on the part of Fred Lee Crisman is what I'm getting. This is what I'm getting they did with a lot of these old timers. A lot of these old timers who were just free to do whatever they wanted to kind of kick back in their last couple of years. They would just go around and they would deliver money. They would do various things. It's kind of the impression that I'm getting. Okay, let's see. Crisman heard by grand jury. So we have an article here now after the grand jury testimony, which we'll cover tomorrow. JFK death knowledge is disclaimed anew. The Orleans Parish Grand Jury Thursday excused a radio commentator from Tacoma, Washington, after hearing a little more than an hour of testimony from him in connection with District Attorney Jim Garrison's Kennedy death probe. Fred Lee Crisman, 47, and his attorney Robert G. Griffin, also of Tacoma, said they plan to spend the rest of the week seeing New Orleans after he was released at 3 p.m. Crisman expressed bafflement at being called before the jury. He said he knows none of the principals in the case. However, he said he did know an Omaha, Nebraska evangelist, Thomas Edward Beckham, who testified in the probe earlier this year. Garrison claimed that Crisman made many trips to New Orleans and Dallas in connection with undercover work for manufacturers of military hardware. Garrison also said Crisman acted as a gypsy minister. Tells of visits. Crisman said that he was last in New Orleans about 2 years ago, but for several days. Before that, his last visit occurred while stationed in Florida during World War II, he said. Crisman said he was a fighter pilot in World War II and the Korean War. A ruddy-complexioned, square-jawed man of average height, Crisman said he won the Distinguished Flying Cross several times, the Purple Heart, and other decorations. Who else won the Distinguished Flying Cross? Jack Valenti did. Wonder if there's a connection between Fred Lee Crisman and Jack Valenti directly. He said he's not a minister of any kind, but added that he wrote guidelines for the Office of Equal Opportunity Head Stewart program as it applies to gypsies. He said he took a job at the request of a gypsy whom he has known all of his life. He taught English. Crisman said he was a high school English teacher in his native Tacoma before turning to radio and writing. He has worked for the Boeing Company in Seattle also, he said. Garrison contends that President John F. Kennedy was killed by elements of the industrial warfare complex working with individuals in the government. Before hearing Crisman, the jury indicted James Alley, Diham, 40, 2128 Rousseau on a charge of murdering Gabriel Guillot Jr., 21st. Okay, gotcha. It's a separate, unrelated case. Okay, so the grand jury will hear multiple cases at the same time, basically, and so this is just saying what the grand jury was up to prior to that. Guillot died in front of 830 Nashville after being shot in the back early Tuesday. DM told police that He shot after seeing Guillaume flee from the apartment of Diam's estranged wife. Okay, so that's completely unrelated to what we're dealing with here. Moving on. Okay. So, what is this one? Announcer appears in Kennedy probe. Okay, one more article. This is a short one on Crisman's appearance. A Tacoma, Washington radio announcer went before the Orleans Parish Grand Jury shortly before 2 p.m. on Tuesday in connection with District Attorney Jim Garrison's continued probe of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Fred Lee Crisman, who Garrison claims was an undercover agent of the industrial warfare complex, went before the jury at 1:54 this afternoon after waiting outside the jury room for almost 3 hours. Crisman was originally scheduled to appear at 10:30 this morning, but the jury elected to investigate 2 murder cases first. The 47-year-old newsman was accompanied by his attorney Robert Griffin, also of Tacoma, but when Griffin tried to enter the jury room with his client, Assistant District Attorney James Alcock, told him he would have to leave. Alcock told Griffin Louisiana law did not permit a person testifying before the grand jury to have an attorney present. I wonder what the constitutionality of that law is, Griffin said following his ejection. Before Crisman was ushered before the grand jury, Garrison himself made an appearance with the jury, reportedly to confer with his 3 assistants handling the case. The DA remained closeted with the jury for about 10 minutes, then emerged, and Crisman was taken into the room. Crisman told newsmen he had no idea why the DA subpoenaed him, and that he had nothing he could tell Garrison pertaining to the case. Crisman said, however, that he did know an Omaha, Nebraska evangelist, Thomas Beckham, who testified in the case earlier this year. Garrison says Beckham was an associate of the late David W. Ferry, who the DA charges was one of the men who conspired to gun down Kennedy in Dallas 5 years ago tomorrow. In the subpoena, the district attorney said that Crisman, working as a gypsy minister, had made many trips to New Orleans and Dallas in connection with the undercover work for manufacturers of military hardware. Garrison contends Kennedy was murdered by elements of the industrial warfare complex working with individuals in the government. Crisman, who says he appears on Tacoma radio station KAYE under the name John Gold, said he did not know any of the figures in the case, including Lee Harvey Oswald, Kennedy's accused assassin and retired businessman Clay Shaw, one of 2 men indicted by Garrison for conspiracy to murder the president. All right, and the last page that Wiseman had, Wiseman didn't really have Weisberg didn't have shit on fucking Crisman except for like about a dozen documents. The last one here is for like an FBI investigative research sheet. So basically what the FBI does, if they're pulling information on somebody, they'll write it, they have a bunch of files, they'll write all the information down on files that they have here. And this is a list of some files that they had on Fred Lee Crisman. Now, just to note, this is about a fucking 4th or a 5th of the amount of files they had on Jack Valenti, right, when we went over the Jack Valenti stuff. I don't even know if we covered that. We'll get back to Jack Valenti eventually. But I'm really digging this New Orleans stuff and Crisman and all these guys, so we're going to continue on this for a while. But yeah, this is these are the prefixes, right? So if you want to research any of these prefixes, this will tell you what kind of case this was involved with, okay? So 116... 62, if I'm not mistaken, 62 I've seen before. I think 62 just means miscellaneous file. And then 44, 77, and then it looks like 7, and then another 62. So, but that is Fred Lee Crisman's FBI files that they have on him. Really kind of illegible. I guess they don't want people to see this stuff. But that's going to wrap up today's show, and we're going to continue on Mr. Fred Lee Crisman tomorrow with his New Orleans grand jury testimony. So make sure to tune in tomorrow. And once again, if you haven't bought the book, please buy the book. It's on Amazon.com, or you can go to buymeacoffee.com/JFKbook, and you can buy the ebook for $10. You can buy my notes. I got posters for sale. I got about 90 of them left. So thank you to everyone who's bought some stuff. And yeah, or you can go and you can make a donation at buymeacoffee.com/JFKbook. But that's going to do it for today, and we'll be back tomorrow on Corey Hughes' Bloody History. Thank you.